Welcome to Syntax. On today's Supper Club, we have a really good one for you. Daniel Thompson is here to talk all about Tauri, and Tauri is just hitting their version 2. It's in release candidate now. We're going to be talking all about what is Tauri, what are the motivations behind it, what can it be used for, and just all about the nitty-gritty there. So my name is Scott Tolinsky. I'm a developer from Denver. With me, as always, is Wes Boss. What's up, Wes?
Hey, excited to talk to Daniel about Tauri. I know you just got done a whole week working with it, and we've been talking about it for seems like over a year now. So stoked to have him on.
Yeah, I've done a lot of Tauri projects, so I got a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts here, and I'm a big fan of the project. So welcome to the show, Daniel. How you doing?
Great, thanks. It's I'm in the hot seat, but that's because I'm in Malta.
Oh,
it's
wow.
about 30 degrees here. However, it's a kind of tempered basement. I've heard from friends of mine across the Atlantic that it looks like the walls are made of blocks of butter. They're not. They're limestone.
Oh, wow.
No, but I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here and talk to you all about that fantastic Tauri stuff.
Yeah.
Do you live in Malta, or are you just vacationing?
I live here. I actually moved here a few years ago, fell in love with the climate. I have no allergies here whatsoever, which I can't say for the other 45 years of my life, and actually started a company here and run a company out of Malta with a whole bunch of amazing people around the world.
Wow.
That's
So
cool.
do you want to, let's kick this off with a little bit about, and you say Tauri or Tori? How do you say it? Let's say that.
Wow. My friends at SNCC also say sneak, and on what part of the world you're from, whether it's Israel or California, and I probably even said Israel wrong. So, I think the important thing for me is that people understand what it's all about. Names and ways we pronounce them. I say Tauri, you say Tauri. Tomato, tomato, right?
Awesome.
Who says tomato, though?
Yeah, no, yeah, you gotta say tomato. You're right, Wes. So do you want to give the audience, maybe somebody who's never heard of it before, they haven't heard us talking about it or just never seen this project, what's the deal with it? What's it doing?
Sure, that happens a lot. And I think the 3-sentence pitch is that Tauri helps you make really small, performant, and secure applications using a system web view. If I already said too many words that people don't understand, I'll start from the very top. You need a user interface, and Tauri helps you make that using the skills that you might know as a web developer on the front end, and provides you with an application protocol interface, an API that lets you then communicate with the core of a Tauri app, which is traditionally written in Rust, although there are projects that let you do it in Python, and if you're adventurous, heck,
Cool.
Why not even write it in C?
So basically you're making apps with Tauri, right? You're making desktop apps, and now with version 2, you're making mobile apps as well. Right? That's the big version 2. Is that what version 2 is all about, or is there more there?
There is a lot of work under the hood to make Tauri even more performant and smaller. In the course of our design decisions leading up to the 2.0 release candidate, we felt that it was important to include the mobile ecosystem. Some people have accused me personally, in a way, of course, of doing it for the upvotes on Hacker News or GitHub. But actually, it's a really interesting architectural strategy, because once you think you know a system really well and you provide one way for people to interact with it and use it, you think that is the way. And in the course of integrating Tauri into Android and iOS, we discovered that the way that we'd built for desktop just didn't work. We actually had to fundamentally rethink a lot of the things that we were doing. And what that led to was an even more secure system for users, because now they actually have to opt into and grant permissions on a very granular level to the various subsystems that they need, whether that's the camera or the file storage, right? The move to mobile actually brought with it a lot of other benefits to the ecosystem. I think another one that people were concerned about with 1.0 was this method by which you send messages from the user interface to the core. It's like the inter-process communication, we call it. The way that we'd been doing it in the beginning was, let's just say, left room for be desired, especially when you wanted to do things like stream data from the back end, because every blob has to be serialized, and then it has to go across the border, transferred over to the front end, and then it has to be deserialized, and then it has to be integrated into whatever thing is reading it, whether it's a video player or an audio stream. And so we put a lot of work into verifying that we are now, I think it's something like 10 times faster with 2.0 versus 10 versus 1.0. I remember way back when we were writing up the list of things that we thought were important to qualify Tauri 1.0 as being stable was having an updater that lets people update their apps. Because I think, especially for beginners, you think, oh, I made an app, I'm done. And actually it's an infinite game in the context of, after the release is before the release. And you have to figure out a way to get that updated code to the users and do it in a secure way. And that was actually one of the first occasions where we felt that we found a better solution than what Electron was doing, because our friends in the security community found a vulnerability that we were then able to sidestep, because we are now forcing people who make updates to provide a Tauri signing key to sign the actual binary, so that when an update comes, it can prove that it's coming from the same authorial provenance, right?
Oh, yeah.
Those all sounds like tough problems. So I'll be on like websites, right? We got websites which just push a new update. We don't have to worry about signing and deploying and having the user update.
Oh, yeah.
It's a whole nother world.
I think with the web, we've come to realize that things like integrity checksums are important when you're pulling source from remote. And with the whole module federation blowing up everywhere, being really important in this opportunity to, hot push to running apps, I think that the security model can always be improved. And maybe there's ways for people using module federation and Tauri together to get the best of all those worlds, right?
So talking about Electron, because people listening right now are probably going, okay, that seems cool. Maybe I've built an Electron app in the past. And the real benefit to using Tauri versus Electron is that it's not huge. Like the joke with Electron is that you download an entire thing, and we're running these massive Chrome apps on absolutely every single desktop, right? And before you know it, you have like 8 instances of Chrome running. Probably I'm running them right now. Is that fair to say?
Obviously, one of the benefits of shipping a Tauri app is that your binaries are 3 to 9 megabytes in size.
Yeah.
Until you start adding LLM models or something like that, or shipping lots of images. But the smallest app we ever built was 500 some kilobytes, right?
Wow.
So you can go and golf really small. And I think for people who are doing hobby projects or, using GitHub at the weekend for their free time, they don't expect to get 100,000 downloads a month or 1 million or more. And what happens at that point is that you realize GitHub isn't actually a CDN. And there's problems once you start to put those binaries in an AWS bucket, because somebody's paying that bill for that transit, and it's going to be you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I never really thought about that. Updating an image. I always think about that, like Discord. Discord updates like every time I open it, and it downloads like 300 megs or something like that. I'm like, that's expensive.
I don't know about you, but I do travel quite a bit because I live in Malta. I have to leave the island somehow, and usually it's with a plane. And I always forget to turn off data because I'm traveling. I live on my phone when I'm traveling. I sometimes don't even bring a laptop. I can get everything done. And then I'm in the airport in Zurich, and LinkedIn says download. It's, 150 megabytes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not going to complain about the LinkedIn app. I think LinkedIn is a wonderful service. But in Switzerland, I'm paying roaming. So I would ultimately pay 15 euros to download the update of LinkedIn right there. I guess the problem gets compounded when you start thinking about the accessibility of software engineering to regions like Kenya and India. I mean, Kenya in particular is notorious for not even having 4G, and people are oftentimes paying for traffic directly. And so, especially in regions where there was a skip, there was never a laptop generation, everybody's on their phone, finding and providing a methodology by which people can create cost-effective, energy-efficient, resource-preserving applications can, in some cases, even turn into life-saving events. I think that the claim that, okay, Electron is just free real estate has kind of been debunked, but there's a couple more nuances there. You mentioned that it ships a Chromium instance. Which Chromium instance does it ship? Well, I can tell you it's not the latest Chromium. It's always behind. And when you produce a Electron app and you ship it to your customers, chances are good by the time it's shipped, there are already end days exploits out there for that version of Chromium that your users are running. And what that turns into is a security whack-a-mole where actually, if you are shipping an Electron app and you have some kind of CISO in your team, then they're probably justified in requiring that you have a milestone of shipping an updated Electron app probably that same day. Given the fact that Europe and the US and Japan and everybody actually is starting to get really concerned about the security of our software, having a framework like Tauri that is regularly audited for minor releases and externally audited for major releases is a real positive way to gain that confidence in the framework itself. So those are two reasons, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I ever thought about that. Yeah.
And I'm curious about, like, one of the huge benefits to something like Electron is that the backend is in Node. And I feel like that makes it very accessible to just a lot of regular developers. Whereas on Tauri, you want to write backend, it's in Rust, right? And most people are, I have to learn a little bit of Rust. Like I built an app in it about a year ago and I had to learn a little bit of Rust. It's kind of fun. Is there ever a time, you said, there's a backend in Python, but is there ever a time where we could also have a Node backend as well?
I'm going to tear apart your points here for a second.
Yes.
So Node, probably not. Dino is something that's in research right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember the name of that graphics modification library that everyone's using in Node.js. There's this one very popular one.
Sharp.
Yeah, Sharp. Doesn't Sharp require some kind of post-install compilation phase inside of the runtime because it's not written in JavaScript?
Yes, we just had Ryan on, and he's like, that's the stupidest thing we could have ever done is post-install automatically run code.
Well, I mean, ignoring for a second the absolute security horrors of having your developer machines compromised. My point is that a lot of modules are actually, Node modules themselves, the really powerful ones, are written in something like C or C++. And I guess my argument goes that while you can use Rust, we've tried to take every single pain point out of the Rust equation. You can write your menus in JavaScript. You can trigger all of the low-level systems like send a notification to the user, use the Tauri's HTTP service so you can sidestep cores, for example. And you can control all of this from JavaScript land. And
that's client, right?
From the client, from the web worker, right.
Yeah.
And I think the paradigm shift that's important for me to make people recognize is that there's always a better programmer than you out there. And it's really easy for great programmers to very rapidly build plugins that have not only ways to consume them from Rust, but also from JavaScript. And technically, we won't accept anything into the official library of plugins unless it offers both opportunities.
So you're saying like we could build a good chunk of our apps entirely in JavaScript? Like it's not like even the file system has a JavaScript client-side API.
Right. So you can call the file picker for the operating system that you're on, and then you choose something, and that value then gets returned through Rust and bubbles back up to the JavaScript side.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, when we were working on our Tauri app for Hack Week, we did it's like a syntax production assistant. And one of those things it does is it runs like FFmpeg to generate MP3s and stuff. So that was being done through Rust, but it wasn't super tough, being just done through invoking a message, hitting a file and running that sidecar, and it compiled it. So the Rust stuff isn't that scary if you can get into it a little bit. And we didn't have to do everything in Rust either. I'm curious because Tauri works and is able to ship to Mac, Linux, Windows, iOS, and Android, right? And each of those have their own web view, right? With Safari, it's
WK WebKit.
WK WebKit, yeah. And in addition to that, there's all these APIs that exist in the different systems. How is it possible that you're able to test the surface of all of those different things, whether that is all of the APIs? Do you have like a Mac, a Linux, and a Windows computer set up to hash everything out on? Like what does the actual process for something like that look like?
Lots of VMs physical hardware, of course. I think there's a lot of automated test suites that we have used to prove that up to a certain version of a system web view, a certain API is or is not available. I think the lonely child of the, how do you call 5 twins? Anyway, the lonely child out of the 5 quintuplets,
Yes.
is obviously Linux. Linux itself is a vast ecosystem of people who do things different ways. And we found a library written by our friends over at Igalia called WebKit GTK. One of the large problems for that WebKit distribution itself is that we do not have proper WebRTC.
We should say WebRTC is a way to communicate between clients, right? Most likely used for video, audio streaming.
Right, exactly. There are people who have built it themselves, and that was never something that we as a team were able to support. Another example on Safari is that actually the version of the web view you have is locked to the Safari version that is installed and running right now. There used to be crazy hacks to get around it, but they just weren't sustainable. In a weird twist of fate, the people behind the WebView project team over at Edge, I think they came really close to doing a perfect job. And that has to do with how they distribute the updates of WebView. Basically, our applications check the system to see if there's a WebView 2 installed. If not, it phones home and says, hey, Microsoft, give me the WebView 2 that's going to run here on this machine. And then it will get installed, and it's enrolled in something like a rolling release. Every time they make a new release, the device will download it and use that then. You can also install a pinned version as well. None of this is really great from the nuanced perspective of connoisseurs. We knew this back in 2019. And in fact, back when we were just a core team of like 4 people, we even tried to compile Servo. We tried to get Servo to run.
Can you explain what Servo is?
Yeah, so Servo is a project kicked off by the Mozilla research team. The idea behind Servo was to investigate the utility of leveraging the Rust programming language to build a whole browser. As fate would have it, the search bar barons decided to switch funding, and for a while, that department didn't have any funding, so the team got let go. Also, as fate would have it, Firefox was already using some of those libraries, and they needed somebody to maintain it. And as time went on at Tauri, at the organization, the project, we've adopted a few of those Servo libraries that we're using and helped maintain them for the rest of the community. But we always felt like there was a better opportunity out there. And we actually received some funding from a Dutch nonprofit and the European Commission's NGI, Next Generation Internet Fund. The nonprofit is called Edelnet, and they supported us in doing initial research into testing out if we could use a Servo-type window together with Tauri, which we proved. Then we went on and continued the development work, and today that project is a standalone open source community. It's called Verso, VERSO, and it uses the Servo engine in order to produce a binary that is a browser. However, because we kind of overlap with that team, we're working on building a custom purpose-built web view, obviously for everybody, following spec as close as possible, but even providing shared memory, which basically means the user interface and the back end, as long as they're sharing the same exact types, I'm not talking about big int here, but most of the same types, they can just share that memory instead of having to message across, which makes it extraordinarily performant.
So what you're saying is like you literally built a web renderer, like a browser in Rust, and you could have code that runs on the back end, I'm using air quotes here, that then shares memory. Like you send a massive array from your back end to the browser.
A billion lines.
Yeah, and that would take up a ton of memory because you have it in 2 spots, right? It would be able to share that, right?
Correct.
That's cool.
So what's the likelihood that ever makes it into Tauri as the web view?
it's going to stay as an experimental web view at least for the next 6, 12, 18 months. I think that the risk of making something that experimental the approach is kind of unfair to the tens of thousands of people building with Tauri today. But for greenfield projects where a unified user interface that works across all 5 platforms, that is not Chromium, that leverages the learnings from the delivery mechanism that the WebView 2 team from Edge are using, that solves the problem of, oh, we don't have WebRTC. I guess that's okay. It's absolutely not okay to be missing web critical interfaces and calling yourself a WebView. I think that it's not criminal because there's not really even a great standard for WebViews. WebViews have always kind of been that little extra thing. It's been like, yeah, okay, we'll do you a service. And Microsoft, rightly, in my opinion, discovered that, well, actually, Electron much, and, well, we need a web view. And I believe Teams even made the switch to WebView 2. I don't think they're using Tauri directly, but the learnings are shared across the community, and I feel that that's the important part of all of this, of all the stuff that we're doing.
I even have personal experience here with issues caused by the Safari approach, which is the Safari is tied directly to your Mac version, right? And in my instance, with the Safari WebView, the WK WebView, they hadn't implemented the share screen dialog. That was only part of Safari proper, but not part of the WebView. Is that correct? And so what it would do when you prompted, it would automatically fail any request for get display media, I believe. And that was in an older version of Safari. I wouldn't say that was about a year and a half ago. And I just had to sit on my hands and wait for Safari to push an update and for my computer to get an update before I could even think about implementing that with Safari, which I feel like that's the kind of thing that, the weird thing about the Apple approach is that some of the apps are just tied so directly to the OS. You just have to wait. And then you're not sure if your users are updating and all sorts of stuff there. I mean, that's a tough world compared to being able to choose the version of the WebView. Yeah.
The other problem of Tauri on the Safari-based WebView on macOS is that somebody just decided not to make the testing harness that is available in Safari available to the WebView. So WebDriver interfaces don't exist for the WebView, which is just, a little baffling to me. And hey, guys, if you're listening out there, I'd love to talk to you about this. It's not that hard. Ring me up. You'll find me anywhere you look. We built Tauri from these first principles of giving people the power. And then, yes, the operating system is the best we have for secure updates. Like, I think that Safari is going to do a better job, generally speaking, of shipping secure updates. And people are probably generally better about updating their operating system in Safari than they might be about Firefox. That said, these nuances are turning into pain points for people. And that's the point, where we decided as a team that it's important to go deeper and solve that layer, because no one's going to do it for us. Apparently, we gave them 5 years and the situation hasn't gotten better. And then you might ask yourself, Daniel, well, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's probably going to ask for a glass of milk. And you better believe it. There are experiments going on right now to create, I'm not going to call it a Tauri OS, but a bootable microcontroller that instantly goes into kiosk mode running a Verso-based web view that is harnessed and controlled by Tauri.
Wow.
How big would that be? Could you run that on some pretty small hardware?
Yeah, we're targeting the ST32.
The ST32. Hold on. Let me Google what that is.
It's tiny.
It's that's a ARM chip, correct? That's like a chip that would go in a low power cell phone.
A chip for industrial application. They're going to be making them for decades. The IP is very clear. Everyone knows exactly how it works, so it's very well known. It's easy to acquire. It's easy to manufacture. And, in some cases, if you have a giant part order, you can basically print your own ASIC on the expanded version of the 32 series and put all of your logic onto silicon. I'm not suggesting we're going to go down that road. I'm just talking about research that we're doing. And again, STEM, if you're listening, love to talk to you guys. Great stuff.
with all this research and all these projects, and the Tauri project has been so, it feels like vibrant for a long time. There's always movement. I've been following since earlier on, and it feels like you're always working hard on something on this project. And that said, there's nothing about a paid product or anything on the website that I can see. How does this project make money and sustain itself?
The project is a purely open source project that is hosted by a Dutch foundation. No one who works inside of the organization receives any money for it. It is all based on volunteering. Are a couple companies, mine included, that pay the salaries of senior engineers in the project. But we made the decision very early that this was not IP that would ever get snagged. And I'm not going to name names. I don't want to shame any of our listeners out there, but it's literally legally impossible for any individual in the community to change the license.
Wow.
Like if the board of directors decided, oh no, you know what, we're going to take this private, the working group would revolt pretty instantly, cause a vote of no confidence, remove the board of directors from their seats, and then vote in a new board and revert whatever commits those people thought they were entitled to make made. So that is the most ideal version of a community-driven project that we could think of. But of course, people have jobs, and in open source, they likely have a job and a hobby, and the hobby is open source, but then people get families and kids and other hobbies. And we actually raised money from an incredible VC, Joseph Jacks from OSS Capital, and a cohort of amazing angels gave us money to finish off Tauri 2.0. We dedicated a lot of time and effort and money into that, and build products that serve the Tauri ecosystem. I mean, you've probably worked with the auto updater, Scott. One of the key things that we knew people were always going to face was setting up an auto updater service that hosts the latest versions, hosts the old versions, hosts release notes, hosts it for all of the operating systems that are out there, and then provides updates and manages that all in such a painless way that you probably only have to visit the website twice and set up the CI once and check your credit card invoice at the end of the month. It's just that bulletproof and that simple, because it's important to get that right. It's like that last part of running a marathon or building a desk. If you forget to hydrate, you're not going to finish the marathon. If you don't treat the wood, you're going to get termites. Those are things that you learn from experience. But if you've never done this before, you're going to go your own way, and it's going to cost you a lot of time. And for our friends in startups, they don't have time. They're burning candles at both ends. And if you can get this entire thing set up in 5 minutes, 10 minutes of your time, with the support of the team if you need it, then it's actually a very net positive win for the broader community. And yeah, that's the main service that the CRAD Nebula provides, is this cloud where you can store your assets, ship your assets, update your assets, and coming soon, prove compliance with these amazing new European regulations.
Wow. So to make that clear, it is Crab Nebula, crabnebula.dev. And that is, I had a peek at some of these things, and obviously I don't want this to sound like an ad, but like the thing I love about it is that it's taking the things you're going to have to do and making it much easier on you, because yeah, you can do it without Crab Nebula, but that doesn't sound like a ton of fun to me. So yeah, I think that's a good way to approach, because it's not necessarily funding Tauri dev in the way that you're thinking. Or would you consider Crab Nebula, I know we kind of went over how you got funding, but would you consider Crab Nebula funding the development of Tauri long-term?
I think we're always going to be involved. The risk of just one company doing it is that we were talking about before, about testing your theories, is that it can kind of run into the risk of appearing like it's all being pushed up by one company. And it's really not. I mean, yes, we are heavily involved, but without the amazing contributions and participation of the open source community and the working group, Crab Nebula couldn't have even done it alone, right? And to recognize that, the Tauri community represented by the working group has approved, actually it took a year of doing this, but they ultimately approved Crab Nebula as the official partner of Tauri, which is beneficial to us. I mean, we've placed information together with the working group in the Tauri documentation that says, hey, you don't want to roll your own update, go check out this Crab Nebula service. Or You're having trouble debugging the IPC call, check out Crab Nebula's DevTools. In a similar way to how React Native shares the services offered by Expo, right? So there is prior art that we sort of modeled that approach on.
And if you want to see all of the errors in your application, you'll want to check out Sentry at sentry.io/syntax. You don't want a production application out there that, well, you have no visibility into in case something is blowing up and you might not even know it. So head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Again, we've been using this tool for a long time and it totally rules. All right.
I'm curious about the iOS part. When you need to go native, meaning that, okay, I need to interface with some sort of native API that Tauri does not give me, like calendar or native maps or Bluetooth, you tap something. Is the idea there that they're similar to React Native where there's just a large community of people that will build bridges for that type of thing?
I mean, writing Swift is just another programming language, right? Just like Kotlin.
How would you access like the Swift from your JavaScript that's running in your Tauri app?
With a bridge, and we write the bridge in Rust, right?
Okay,
so
right on.
the bridge is then available to Rust, but through the JavaScript API that the command functionality via invoke and respond provides, we're able to then communicate directly with the app itself. I mean, recently for a client, we built a mapping app that leveraged geolocation and haptics. So, when the ride arrives, you get a buzz. And that was all custom Tauri plugins that we wrote that are open source to everybody. There's so much prior work and good stuff out there. And thanks to the open source community, we're able to find out where people went right or where they went wrong. I mean, NativeScript, Capacitor, React Native have all had to deal with these problems in one way or the other. And at the end of the day, it's just engineering.
So what is the hardest part of putting mobile into Tauri? I mean, it had been around with desktop for a little while, I know you had to rewrite a considerable amount of things, but getting mobile applications to work well with Tauri, what was the hardest part of that whole process?
Of everything that happens after it's compiled. Interacting with the entire developer ecosystem provided by Apple and Google. Is it Alphabet and Play Store? Anyway, interacting with those services is tricky because, first of all, you want to automate everything you can. And second of all, you also need to have a human in the loop in certain places, right? You can't just wildly release an accidental update to every device in your fleet. There has to be a human involved. And I think that we've worked hard to keep it not absolutely necessary to use the tools provided by the respective ecosystems. But, sometimes you just have to, and sometimes it's just more efficient. And I think the interesting comment that I've heard people say about Tauri is, you can write code in one way for all the platforms. If you don't know Rust, for example, you get this amazing feature called conditional compilation, which means it detects the target operating system and hardware that it's building for and gets rid of everything else. Like if you're building for Mac OS ARM, for example, or just Mac OS, let's call it that, the easy way, you're not going to build all the stuff that you might need that's slightly different for Windows. And I think that the trickiest part that we faced, Scott, to come back to your question directly, was that in order to run a Tauri app in those contexts on mobile, we had to change to a library approach inside of Rust, which means you have a different way of compiling it and then interacting with it and rigging it. And ultimately, we don't own everything anymore. And for people who are Rust nerds, it's a hard pill to swallow. To finally come to the situation where you are not the absolute owner of every piece of memory out there. It's a caveat that I think is acceptable in these cases where we have to interface with low-level subsystems, we have to interface with the system web view, and those are the methodologies that are available. If something changes and it becomes suddenly easier through work being done by people in the Rust or Android or iOS ecosystems, we'd absolutely consider, revisiting that, making alternative approaches available to people.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the haptic plugin here, and it's really not that much. It makes sense where there's a sources haptics plugin.swift, and 100 lines of Swift in there, and then maybe another 20 lines to register the plugin via Rust, and then you can call that thing from JavaScript. That's pretty neat. I'll link up the example in the show notes.
I also have to say the mobile ecosystem has a couple decades head start on Tauri, and we are not a company with 1,000 employees, and we don't have billions of dollars of funding, and the community is based on people that want to help each other. We knew that we would never be able to hit the full surface area of every single type of plugin that everybody wants out of the gate. And so the approach we took, which was approved by our auditors, Radically Open Security from the Netherlands, who audited our Tauri 2.0 via funding from the European Commission, again, they agreed to review several types of plugins for veracity, for simplicity, for readability, and for security. Because giving an auditing firm 150 different plugins to audit is something that's going to take a lot of linear time. Even if they put 4 or 5 people on it, there's just not that many experts in the security venue working in the same place, right? So you'd have to shop around, nightmare. The approach that we took is we tried to make it so simple that, gosh, I don't know. I mean, somebody in the community said they were looking for a plugin, and they went over to Capacitor, found a plugin there, and looked at it and figured out how to write it for Tauri, because they were good, solid Rust engineers. You know, like, you take that, you understand how plugins work. That is of benefit. You know, when you are a solid engineer, you're capable of making these kinds of things, then it also opens up a market for other companies to get involved and decide, yeah, we're going to make this plugin for our customers. And hey, maybe 1 out of 10 get contributed back upstream to the open source community, right?
Yeah. And I found the Tauri ecosystem to be, in terms of like or just community in general, whether it's the Discord or the GitHub, anytime I'm looking for help, there's always somebody who's been ready to help me. Or even like, just in general, there's a lot going on. There's people in there talking. There's, in general, a lot of support amongst community members. And I found that to be really just a positive aspect about, you know, when you pick a platform, you don't want to pick something that's a ghost town or that everybody's, I don't know. I've been in some grumpy web communities before, and Tauri certainly isn't that. So I've always really appreciated that aspect of how everybody seems to work together. I'm curious about, like, what are some of the larger apps that have been shipped with Tauri? Are you aware of most of the apps that have shipped with Tauri, or just things popping up left and right?
I mean, I have two direct comments to that. I wish, but we do not run telemetry. That was a choice. Maybe we could add something optional in the future. But I mean, what I do know is, for example, from SourceGraph, Cody is written in Tauri.
Oh, cool.
I know that Git Butler has chosen Tauri for their platform. If you watch Scott Chasson, pretty much every talk, he'll drop a slide where you see that it's Tauri. And I actually sat next to him at a conference as he was hammering in some Rust code and fighting with the compiler, but he won.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I think that the apps you can find, there's 2 places to look in the community. We have an awesome Tauri repo where people place and should place their private projects, their proprietary projects, use it as a platform to spread the word. And if you're looking for more interaction or feedback, a lot of people use the Tauri Discord because we have a showcase. And you can just come and showcase your app. And if you have an update, you give an update to the people that are using it, or they give you some feedback, and that'll bubble up to the top of the showcase. So you can also start to engage with the Tauri community. And I guess if I was to try to place Tauri apps into genres, I think the people who are not afraid of an early adopter tax are dev tools, people who are building things for, you know, making their dev life easier. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of those. I've seen teamwork apps being built with it. And again, you know, this whole productivity market is where a lot of young startups are, you know, sharpening their swords and getting into the fray. Another weird one is add-ons for Twitch streamers. Like, I've seen a lot of people build these. Like, there was one from a long time ago that's recently been updated where it takes voice to text and places the text onto the screen.
Cool.
Games are popular, but not in the sense that you think. Actually, it's the launchers that people come to Tauri to build. So they'll build a launcher for the game in Tauri and use the launcher to do amazing things like manage the assets, manage the versions, use it to do the download. Because you got this
Wow.
massive binary that you just spit out of your game engine of choice, and
Yeah.
it runs great on the platform you built it for. And having a launcher is, kind of a semi-common thing, especially for game studios, right? So if you have 3 or 4 different games, that way you can keep people engaged and tell them when there's a new game or a new update because you've got their eyes.
Man, this awesome Tauri list is
really
absolutely
good.
massive.
Yeah.
And like there's hundreds of apps on here. It's really cool. There's EPUB readers, screen recorders on there, visualizers, keyboard driven database management. There's so many cool things on here. It's fun to just click through, especially they mark which ones are like paid, like closed source paid apps, which is kind of interesting because if people are running businesses on this, you have an idea, you want to build a little app and charge $6 for it, you can do that with this.
Yeah, and you know what I will say from somebody who doesn't write Rust, it's a good introduction to writing Rust because like we've talked about, you don't have to get crazy into it. But I'm not a Rust engineer and we were able to ship some pretty serious stuff just getting into it. It's just it's a heck of a lot of fun to build an app. It's just cool.
My partner's daughter is 24. She just graduated from college. Hi, Cheyenne. And she asked me to teach her Rust. She's never programmed before. And I put her through the course. She's doing the Rustlings course. Check it out, Rustlings. It's a great way to learn the basics. She's watched the video solutions to Rustlings. And believe it or not, I don't know if you follow Cassidoo, but every week, Cassidy Williams, Cassidoo, she publishes a challenge. And I've been having Cheyenne run the challenges, but write them in Rust.
Cool.
And we got into this really interesting challenge that was all about time, right? And understanding, like, I forget, this was a challenge from Cassidoo a couple of years ago. And it was all about log lines, basically. You get a log line and how much time elapsed between them, between jobs. And, for Cheyenne, this was a big thing because, she's never been exposed to a production environment. I mean, let alone GitHub. Actually, she does sign her commits now, she's taking the right teacher this time. But I guess the point I wanted to make is that when we decided that we were going to have to show this somehow to Cassidoo, we put it through a WASM time and built WASM from the Rust and executed the WASM blob in the browser via a GitHub page. And because we were talking about time, I was like, Rust is a lot faster than JavaScript. And she's like, no, it isn't. And I was like, okay, go over to ChatGPT, copy paste your Rust function that you wrote, ask it to change it to JavaScript. We took that, we put it into the index HTML and discovered or not, milliseconds faster was Rust every time. Until, Scott, are you going to guess what happened? She used an I32. She used a type of integer that just doesn't go very big, which meant that suddenly we were confronted with big int and this whole notion of numbers. And I guess the reason why I'm bringing this up is if somebody who's never studied computer science before is able to start completing Cassidoo's challenges in 3 weeks and learn about JavaScript at the same time, there's really no excuse other than being unwilling or lazy or you've got other things to do. It's
Totally.
not hard if you put the time in. And honestly, the 3 of us wouldn't be sitting here if we had decided at some point to be lazy and not put the time in.
Yeah. And I found, writing Rust even made me a better TypeScript developer. There are so many things that are similar in ways, especially if you're not coming from type languages primarily. What does the future of Tauri look like? I know we're in RC phase for version 2. Is that going full release anytime soon? And after that, what's next?
So Tauri 2.0 is scheduled for in about 2 weeks, the stable release. What the versions mean to us in the Tauri ecosystem is an alpha means we're just trying stuff out. We're trying to see like what's good enough for everybody. A beta means the architecture has been decided, it's been designed, and we hand it off to the auditors. And as the auditors have findings, we revise the structure, the architecture. When we get to RC, the API is locked and we're just bug fixing. It's open to the community. It's battle ready, but it hasn't been battle tested. You can't expect there will be any changes because all of the critical stuff has been found. And then it's a documentation sprint. The RC phase is always a documentation sprint because we just found out that all of our assumptions have been proven or fixed by the auditors. Yeah, so very near future. We're recording this on the 27th of August. So our plan and expectation is in the month of September to celebrate the stable launch.
Awesome. Yeah.
Wow.
So the future, Tauri 3.0. I actually saw somebody in our Discord talk about that. And that's actually, when you have these super highly motivated engineers and they're just kind of like stuck twiddling their thumbs and like, I can't write docs all day, I have to do something. And we're like, don't touch that again. Just leave it be. And he's like, okay. I can't push to the dev branch though, because dev promotes to some other, like our release structure is kind of interesting, but you have to fork and then you have to track. And so we've started putting together a list of things that we want to really button down for 3.0. One of those, if you ask me, is going to be having at least an experimental web view of our own available on all three browsers. I mean, our release cadence is about once every 2 years. It's about how we get to a major release. We're methodical in the approach that we take to releasing software. And that gives us enough time to collaborate with the other teams because that's a pretty big project. I think what we'll really see is a lot of engagement in the mobile ecosystem. People like Cheyenne, people who have an idea but don't know how to bring that all the way to the end, are increasingly turning to AI tooling. That's unstoppable. That train is traveling. I think the important part for us to realize is that, as engineers, a lot of the code that's going to be executed inside of the context of a Tauri app is going to be written by LLMs or LLMs trained by humans or maybe slightly modified, which takes I'm not judging here, but there is a tradecraft to understanding the possibilities of things like side effects and code smell that if you don't know what tabs and spaces are, you're not going to care. And who cares about linting as long as it runs on my machine? And so I think that tooling for absolute beginners who, like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, are confronted with a tool they don't understand is not an excuse big enough to prevent us from finding concrete ways to help them. And so I would see the transition to Tauri 3.0 as being one of those experiences where we fix things that have been bugging us along the way. We see it as a maintenance release, but we work really hard on improving the developer experience for everybody, no matter who they are, where they're coming from, what programming language they're using, and just turn it into this very utilitarian, agnostic framework that is good. I guess, it sounds trite, but I really believe that software engineering has a way of changing people, and it can change them for the better if they understand what it is that they're doing. And I'm not going to go on a philosophical rant right now, but there's something that feels good at the end of the day when your Rust code compiles, you commit your code to your version control system, and you come back the next day and it's still working. And I guess the risk for a project like Tauri is something that was made really clear to me back in the days right before we launched 1.0 stable. And that was the week that Explorer was deprecated. The deprecation was announced of Explorer and Atom Shell the week before Tauri 1.0 stable came out. And I think I talk about this almost at every major release because it still sits with me. If you do not continue to innovate, your project will at some point disappear in relevance. And that is tempered with the desire of a Rust engineer, I count myself amongst them, to have something finished. I think the notion of being done is something that you can achieve with a compiled language that's hard to do with JavaScript. I'll give you an example. Try catch, right? Like, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And why is that? And Rust is really, like, to get to that kind of behavior, you've got to work really hard. And I think that the question we're going to ask ourselves as we get to 3.0 is, what does done look like for Tauri? And how can we keep on innovating? I think, as I mentioned earlier, the momentum to build a web view good enough for everybody, but designed for Tauri, is a huge lift. I think that's something that's going to carry on for a decade probably. And then I sort of hinted at it, but I think that the interop with other programming languages like Python, like PHP, like script-based languages, whether it's TypeScript or script or whatever scripty languages you're using, opens up the venue for everybody, right? You don't have to be a Rustation to even touch it at that point. That's about as far out the window of this train that I can lean.
That's amazing. You know what? I love what you said about even the concept of done is something that us in the JavaScript world, we don't have that concept. If we see a package that hasn't seen an update in 6 months, we're like, is this abandoned? Where in Tauri or even in Rust in general, I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen people ask about abandoned packages and like, what do you mean abandoned? It's done. It's like, oh, we don't, I've never even thought about that in the web world. So it's an interesting concept that it's so far removed from the web world,
Let's move into the last section here. We have a sick pick and shameless plug. Did you bring a sick pick for us?
So my sick pick would be 5-second films. It's a troupe of comedians who've made short films forever. I think almost 20 years they've been doing them.
Yeah.
And
I have one in my watch view from 13 years ago. It said I watched this at some point in the past 13 years. So.
Yeah. And what I love about these short films is that they force you as a viewer to come to terms with a situation you weren't prepared for really quickly, find humor in it, and move on. I think that in the world I live in of software engineering, we kind of end up getting stuck with these ideas in our head, and it's hard to flush them. And I think that this group does a really great job. I'm not an affiliate, but support them on Patreon. It's a good thing.
So what about a shameless plug?
I'm actually writing a book at the weekends. I got involved in the discussion around the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe last year when everybody was going crazy that open source was going to have to turn into a product. And as time went on, and I've had more conversations, and I've been on panels, and I've held talks, and I've got notes put together, I decided that it's an important opportunity in the weeks before this act gets published in Europe to make a guide for people just building software. Because the Cyber Resilience Act is all about the notion that products with digital elements are now going to be regulated in Europe. And sure, there's going to be a few years that you have to get into compliance, but what it does to the notion of product, which I love, and engineering, which I need, and these crazy interrelated documents that go back 15 years. And in one document, they'll say one word, and everybody knows exactly what that word means, who's been around since 2012 and has been reading all of these things. And it's such a behemoth of a topic that I thought I would take some mystery out of it and polish up my LaTeX. I already got the ISBN numbers. I'm just waiting to publish it.
What's it going to be called?
Manufacturing European Software.
Awesome. And can people find that anywhere?
It's going to be on Amazon. It's going to be on my corporate website. I'm going to be shilling it on LinkedIn and at conferences. Because I have 4 ISBNs, I'm also printing the physical copy. So if you see me somewhere, I will always have a couple copies there. So hit me up. And it's been a really exciting journey, especially because the topic is so underserved and there's so much FUD out there. The act has changed over the past 3 years, almost 3 years. Things that people wrote about it 2 years ago are just wrong, like literally wrong, because this thing has been evolving. And yeah, so that's my shameless plug.
Sweet.
I'm writing a book.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredible. It's been great to hear about Tauri, but not only that, just all your amazing thoughts and everything. So thank you so much. This has just been really enlightening. If you haven't checked out Tauri, we'll post all the links of everything that we talked about in these show notes. I highly recommend to give it a try. It's an incredible piece of software in general to work in, a great platform. So thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.